This was a fun bike because I went into it totally blind. I didn't know this bike was going to be at Outerbike, so it wasn't on my radar. I hadn't looked at the geometry numbers or the part spec. Not that looking at the part spec would have helped, because this was DVO Suspension's showcase bike for their fork and shock. Not only did they have their fork and shock, which was unique for this bike, but most of the other components were as well. I'll run down all the parts, the things that I liked, the things I didn't like, as well as some thoughts on the frame.
Yes.
The highlight of this bike for me was the fork. The DVO Diamond fork is something of a hybrid, and I am not talking about a Prius. It doesn't combine gas engine electric motors to a fuel efficient and dual package, but it combines a coil spring and an air spring into an awesome fork. The small coil spring handles the small bumps with more awesomeness than anything I've ever ridden. They call this the off-the-top spring. There's also an air spring that takes over after 30% sag. This offers bottom-out resistance that the coil couldn't do all by itself. I don't know all the intricacies of this fork, but I know that it works amazing. This was the best fork that I rode all weekend. I rode Fox Factory 36s, I rode a RockShox Lyric, and this was my favorite fork of the weekend. I definitely want to put one of these on my next bike. The DVO Topaz rear shock. This reminded me a lot of the coil that I rode on the Stump Jumper Evo earlier in the same day, but I actually liked this more. It hugged the ground really well. I'm not sure everything that goes into making this shock. I didn't do a ton of research on it, but there's a bladder inside. Again, not sure how that works. Probably something I should do research on, but it seemed to be a great shock. Probably one of my favorite shocks I rode all weekend. It was set up to be a little more ground huggy than poppy, more supple rather than playful. But I know that this shock has a ton of adjustment on it, and I'm sure you could get it to go however you wanted. Part of that might be just due to the fact that it was moving 155 millimeters of rear wheel travel. So it did have a lot of travel that it was going through, but overall, really great shock that I liked a lot. TRP G-Spec brakes. These were the best brakes that I rode all weekend for sure. They have really great initial bite and power just like Shimano's, but modulation more like SRAM brakes. I ended up ranting to all the other guys in my group about these brakes because I liked them so much. I have a buddy who rides Hope brakes on his bikes. He said he likes his Hopes a little bit better, but these were definitely a close second is what he told me. They have kind of a wide lever, so there's more contact patch for your braking finger. I really like that. It almost feels like it gives you more control or something like that. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Hee hee, get the pun. But these brakes also use mineral oil, which I like. I'm about to put a Z brake caliper, which has 4 pistons, on my XT brakes, which have 2 pistons, and I'm curious to see how they compare, because these G-Spec brakes were also 4-piston brakes. In any case, I would definitely be happy if these brakes were on my next bike. This bike had the E13 TRSR single-ply Apex front tire. It was maybe a little bit draggy, but it had amazing grip. The rear tire was also from E13, but it was their new semi-slick tire, which was fast rolling but had good cornering grip. I would definitely be super happy with this tire setup on my bike. They looked like they had a good profile on the carbon rims that I rode. I can't remember if they were a 35 internal or a 30 internal, but these tires definitely had good volume for just being a 2.35 tire. They either run true to size or a little bigger, almost like a Maxxis 2.5 inch wide tire, but very good, lots of grip. The last thing that I thought would make a huge difference that I actually didn't even think about or notice until I was looking at this parts list again was that this bike had Noble carbon rims and an Onyx hub. And I really can't say I could tell that they were there. The carbon rims didn't seem like they spun up super fast or anything like that, and I wasn't really doing any climbing, so the instant engagement of the Onyx hubs, I couldn't tell. I'm sure that if I went on more of a trail-oriented ride, I could notice something, but really didn't notice a difference. The Nukeproof Mega frame itself. What did I think about it? Like I said before, it was fun to ride a bike that I didn't know anything about. One thing I did notice, probably the first thing, when I was goofing around in the parking lot, was that the bike didn't want to really manual in my hands. It could be the long chain stays, could be the amount of travel, or the way the shock was set up, but didn't really want a manual or wheelie. It also seemed like it had sort of longer seat tubes, which doesn't make a lot of sense anymore with long travel droppers. I'm just over 6 foot tall, and I rode the size large. It fit me pretty well. Did feel a little bit small compared to some of the other bikes that I was riding this weekend. It's bigger than my bike that I have at home, but I prefer something that was a little bit longer in the reach. So when I got done riding, I was really impressed with the bike. I had a ton of fun on it. Thought it was very capable, very fast. And so I asked the lady working at the DVO booth, hey, is this bike super rad, or is it just the components that are super rad on this bike? She said it was both. And she was probably right. I think the bike is a very capable bike. It was a fun bike, but I would say on the realm of poppy and playful versus plowy and comfortable, I'd say it's more of a plow. Not that you couldn't have fun and pop around this bike, it just seemed like maybe a little bit more work to do that. So would I buy this bike? Well, I just don't think this is the kind of bike for me. I feel like something that's a little more fun and poppy and playful rather than this, which is, it just feels more like a race bike. It feels like an enduro bike. Not that it wouldn't be capable, but just maybe not my style. It was still fun, and I'm sure somebody else would just love this bike. But what I would really like to do is put some of these parts on a smuggler or a different bike that I rode this weekend that I really liked, and see the difference that the components make to a package that I already like. I personally think that the order of importance goes, you need to have your geometry dialed and the bike sizing that works for you, then components are after that. Obviously, more important than any of this is you as a rider. But definitely check out some of these bikes' parts that I have listed in the description below. Parts were awesome and definitely worth consideration, even though maybe they're not as popular choices as some of the other things, but they all work really well together.